Imagine waking up and, even before opening your eyes, already knowing there is nothing, no coins in your pocket, no forgotten bills in your bag, no immediate possibility. You get up slowly, not out of laziness but out of fear. Fear of confirming what you already know. You open the kitchen cabinet and find only emptiness, not an ordinary emptiness. A heavy emptiness, the emptiness of food that is gone, the emptiness that makes noise inside your head. The silence of hunger is different from any other silence. It does not scream, it does not explode, it does not call attention to itself. It just stays there, still, waiting. And when there are children in the house, that silence takes on another form. It becomes a restrained cry, a timid request, a look that tries not to be a burden, but hurts deeply. When a child depends on you, hunger is not only physical, it is moral, it is emotional, it eats away from the inside. The pain in the stomach turns into guilt, into shame, into despair. And the worst feeling of all settles in slowly, helplessness. That is where Mariele ended up. She did not arrive there suddenly. It was not a fast fall. It was a slow, silent slide, day after day, until she realized there was no ground left beneath her feet. Mariele was a mother of two young girls, one of them with special needs. Two lives that depended entirely on her to eat, to sleep, to feel safe. Being a mother had always been the center of Mariele's life. It was never easy. It never had been. But there was dignity. There was effort. There was trying. She lived in Uberlandia, in the state of Minas Gerais, and led a simple, tight but honest life. She worked when jobs appeared, improvised when they did not, did the kind of math that almost never added up, but always believed that somehow things would work out until the day the world stopped. When the pandemic arrived, it did not bring only fear of illness. It brought closed doors, suspended jobs, empty businesses, and a future that felt as if it had been unplugged. Restaurants shut down. Stores pulled their shutters closed. People were laid off without warning, without savings, without alternatives. Texto Padrão Mariele watched all of this happen from inside her home. The work disappeared, the income evaporated, the bills kept coming as punctual as ever. Rent, electricity, water, and food, which never waits. At first, she believed it would be temporary. A few days, maybe weeks. She did what she could, sold things, asked for help. Pushed the month forward however she could. She told herself it could not last long, but it did. And as time passed, something began to change inside her. It was not anger, it was not rebellion, it was fear. Fear of looking at her daughters and having no answer. Fear of hearing a simple request and being unable to fulfill it. Fear of realizing she was losing control of her own life. Hunger does not arrive screaming. It announces itself little by little. First comes reduction, then comes choice, choosing who eats more, who eats less. What can be missing today so something might remain tomorrow, until nothing remains. And when that moment arrives, the question appears. Even if no one wants to say it out loud, what do you do when everything is gone? But your children are still hungry. Before hunger turned into despair, it became worry. Mariele was still able to hide the seriousness of the situation from her daughters. She reduced portions, made up excuses, said she had already eaten. She did it with a tired smile, believing that this silent sacrifice was temporary. The days began to repeat themselves with no change. Waking up early, looking for work, hearing refusals, closed doors, phones that never rang back. The city seemed to move in slow motion, while her life ran too fast in reverse. Every no added weight. Every late bill increased the pressure. At home, the girls felt the change. They could not explain it, but they sensed it. They asked less. They observed more. Children understand far more than adults imagine. A simple request, like a glass of milk, became an internal dilemma. A request for juice felt like a test of emotional endurance. Mariele began doing impossible math. If she paid the rent, there was no food. If she bought food, the electricity bill fell behind. If she bought medicine, everything else was missing. The mathematics of poverty never balance. They always demand something in return. The pandemic kept advancing, and with it, isolation. Emergency assistance was delayed, failed, did not reach everyone. Months passed with irregular, insufficient help. Entire families began to fall below the line of extreme poverty. Mariele felt it in her body before she understood it in numbers. The refrigerator grew emptier. The cupboard grew quieter. Fear moved into the house. It was not a fear of dying. It was a worse fear. Seeing her children get sick, grow weak, lose the light in their eyes. She tried to maintain a routine. She woke the girls, tidied the house, organized what little remained. Hope still existed, but it was no longer firm. It was fragile, like cracked glass. Any impact could shatter it. It was at this point that Mariele began to realize she was not just without money, she was without options. And when options disappear, the mind starts to wander down paths that once seemed unthinkable. She did not yet know it, but she was approaching an invisible line, a line that separates what is right from what is possible, a line many judge from afar, but few recognize when they are about to cross it. And while the world outside debated statistics, decrees, and reopenings, inside that house, a mother was fighting to preserve something basic, the survival of her own daughters. There came a day when Mariele realized she was no longer just trying to endure. She was choosing who would feel hunger first. And that is a choice no mother should ever be forced to make. She began to eat less, often nothing at all. She said she wasn't hungry, that she had already eaten outside, that she would eat later. The daughters accepted the explanation, but they watched. Children notice when care turns into absence, when effort turns into too much exhaustion. The girls started asking for less, not because they stopped wanting, but because they learned far too early not to ask. A glass of milk began to be shared, a piece of bread carefully divided. Chocolate, once a source of joy, became a distant memory. Mariele felt her body weakening. Her head ached, her stomach burned. But none of that compared to the pain of seeing one of her daughters sick, with a fever, without money to buy medicine or take her to a doctor. With each sleepless night, the anguish grew. It was during this period that she began to hear stories from other people, neighbors, acquaintances, ordinary people, people who had also lost everything, stories of those who were finding a way, stories that once seemed wrong now sounded like survival. One woman mentioned it casually, another confirmed it. Supermarkets, small thefts, basic items, food, no luxury, no large resale, just what was necessary to get through one more day. When she heard this for the first time, Mariele was shocked. She said no. She said she wouldn't do it. She said she wasn't capable of that. She still believed there was a better alternative waiting just around the corner, but the alternative never came. The days kept passing and hunger kept arriving, earlier each time, stronger each time, until refusal turned into silence, and silence turned into thought. Mariele began to ask herself whether it was more wrong to steal food or to watch a child go hungry. It was not a rhetorical question. It was real, painful, without an easy answer. She felt torn between what she had learned her whole life and what reality was demanding in that moment. The day arrived without warning. There was no elaborate plan, no certainty, no real courage. There was only exhaustion. A deep exhaustion, accumulated from sleepless nights and mornings without answers. Mariele woke up knowing that something had to be done, even without knowing exactly how. She tried to postpone it. She organized the house, put things in order, kept her mind busy. But the image of her daughters kept returning. One wanted juice. The other asked when there would be chocolate again. Simple, innocent questions that hit harder than any accusation. When she left the house, her body was tense. Her heart raced. Each step felt heavier than the last. She repeated to herself that maybe she would give up along the way, that maybe she would turn back. There was still time. As she approached the supermarket, the fear grew. It wasn't fear of the police, it was fear of herself, fear of crossing a line that until then had defined who she was. She stopped for a few seconds at the door, took a deep breath, and went in. Inside, everything seemed too normal. People walking, carts rolling, shelves full, a cruel contrast to the empty house she had left behind. Mariele felt sweat on her hands, her heart pounding, her thoughts confused. She picked up only a few items, just the basics, nothing that would draw attention. Every movement felt slow and heavy, as if her body were betraying what her mind tried to hide. The bag felt heavier than it really was. The walk to the exit was the longest of her life. The sound of footsteps, the noise at the checkout, the voices around her, everything seemed amplified. She expected at any second to be called out, stopped, exposed. Nothing happened. Mariele left the supermarket with trembling legs. The air outside felt different, heavier, colder. She walked quickly without looking back until she was far enough away to stop and breathe. At that moment, fear mixed with another feeling, unexpected and dangerous, relief, an immediate, almost physical relief. Her daughters would have something to eat. That day was secured. When she got home and saw the girls eating, their smiles were both comfort and guilt. Mariele felt something break inside her. It was not pride. It was not satisfaction. It was the realization that something had changed forever. In silence, she promised herself it would be the last time. She told herself it was an exception, an extreme situation, a temporary measure. She wanted to believe that life would give her a break after that day. At that stage, she no longer saw herself as someone thinking about committing a crime. She saw herself as a mother trying to keep her children alive. Morality began to blur with necessity. Fear began to compete with desperation. And without realizing exactly when, Mariele crossed an invisible line within herself. Not with anger, not with malice, but with held-back tears and a heavy heart. In the days that followed, Mariele tried to return to normal life, as if it were possible to pretend that nothing had happened. The food she had taken lasted only a short time, as always. The milk ran out quickly, the rice diminished. The beans were carefully rationed. Reality left no room for regret or deep reflection. It demanded immediate solutions. Mariele kept telling herself that it would not happen again, that she would find a job, that some kind of help would appear, that the pandemic could not destroy everything. But the days passed, and no doors opened. The phone remained silent. The negative answers kept piling up. Her daughters, now fed, began to smile again, and that smile became the cruelest part of the entire story, because every smile carried the memory of how it had been obtained. Guilt never left her, but it also did not prevent her thoughts from returning to the same place. Need returned before hope. When the food ran out again, Mariele's body reacted before her mind could decide. The path to the supermarket no longer felt so distant. The fear was still there, but it was different, smaller, more manageable. What had once seemed unthinkable now sounded like a possible option. She took the risk again. Always little, always the basics. Never out of greed, never out of desire, only to keep the household running. Each time she left, she promised herself it would be the last, and each time reality disproved that promise. Over time, the risk began to turn into routine, not a peaceful routine, but a routine of survival. The tension never disappeared completely, but it became bearable. Her conscience weighed heavily, but hunger weighed more. Mariele began to live in a constant state of alert. Any noise felt like a threat. Any look seemed suspicious. Even at home, fear did not leave her. She slept little, thought too much. Her body showed signs of exhaustion. What she did not yet know was that the more times she crossed that invisible line, the closer she came to the moment when there would be no turning back. Mistakes rarely warn you when they are about to demand payment. And while Mariele fought to gain one more day of calm for her daughters, fate moved silently closer, preparing the day when all of this would stop being just a risk. As time went on, the situation did not improve. On the contrary, the pandemic continued to affect everything, and the little income Mariele managed to earn disappeared before it even arrived. The rent was overdue, bills piled up, the pressure increased every day. One of her daughters became ill, high fever, burning skin, weak crying. Mariele stayed awake all night, placing a damp cloth on the girl's forehead, trying to ease the pain without medicine. Every minute felt like an eternity. The feeling of helplessness returned with full force. That morning, she knew she had to do something, not just to eat, but to prevent something worse. She needed food, she needed money, she needed to keep the household standing. The decision did not come with fear as before, it came with urgency. She entered the supermarket with her head down and her thoughts racing. She took rice, beans, a packaged snack to try to sell later, and she took meat. The meat was essential. With it, Mariele could prepare boxed meals, sell them, and pay part of the rent. It was a desperate attempt to support her family. In her bag, there was also a razor blade. Something simple, something she used in everyday life, but that in that context would become a decisive detail. Mariele did not think about it. She was only thinking about getting out of there quickly. This time there was no silence at the exit. Before she reached the door, she was approached. Everything happened too fast. Voices, commands, stares. The word she feared was finally spoken. Arrest! Her body froze, her heart raced, her mind went into panic. Mariele tried to explain, tried to talk about her daughters, the food, the situation. But there was no room for a story, only for procedure. She asked to go to her home. She wanted to show the reality, wanted to prove it was not a crime born of malice. The officers agreed. When they entered the house, the truth imposed itself without the need for words. The nearly empty refrigerator, the little that remained in the pantry, poverty laid bare. There was silence, embarrassment, but nothing changed the course of events. A neighbor was called to distract the children. Mariele did not want her daughters to see that moment. She did not want that image burned into their memories. Meanwhile, she was handcuffed. As she left the house, Mariele felt something break definitively inside her. It was not just the fear of prison. It was the pain of leaving behind what she loved most, without knowing when she would return. Mariele left home in handcuffs, but the story did not end there. For those who stay behind, the pain continues in a different way. A silent, confusing pain, difficult to explain to a child. The daughters did not understand why their mother did not return. They asked, they called out, they waited. The house, already simple, became empty of presence. Their mother's scent was still there, but the embrace was not. The neighbor tried to distract them, invent games, tell stories. But children feel absence. They feel when something important is missing. At night, the girls slept together, holding each other, clutching their mother's clothes as if that could bring her back. Donna Vera, Mariele's mother, was notified in a rush. She received the news without preparation, without time to think. She needed to pick up her granddaughters, but she had no money. Even so, she went. Because when it comes to a child and grandchildren, there is no calculation. She took the bus, crossed the city with a tight heart and a head full of fear. When she arrived, she found two confused, hungry, and frightened children. She needed to take them home, but she did not know how. At the bus terminal, Donna Vera did what she never imagined she would do. She asked for help. She asked for money. with her granddaughters at her side, feeling hungry. Each request was a humiliation swallowed in silence. Each refusal added more weight to her chest. Until someone stopped. A stranger, without questions, without judgment. He paid for food, he paid for the tickets. He said few words, he did what was necessary, a simple gesture that, in that moment, meant everything. Meanwhile, Mariele followed another path, a cold, impersonal path, where there was no space for explanation or emotion. The journey to the police station seemed endless. Every kilometer increased the distance between her and her daughters. In the cell, alone for the first time, reality truly sank in. Her body trembled. Her head ached. Fear was no longer abstract. It was concrete. It was the fear of not knowing when she would see her daughters again, the fear of having left them far too vulnerable. Dawn arrived without light for Mariele. In the cold cell, time seemed to stand still. There was no clock, but every minute was felt in her body. Hunger returned, mixed with fear. Not just fear of punishment, but of distance, of absence, of her daughters waking up without her. When she was called to testify, she walked through long corridors, hearing doors close behind her. Every sound felt final. She sat before people who saw an act, not a story, a record, not an entire life falling apart. She told everything. She spoke of the pandemic, of unemployment, of hunger, of her daughters. She did not ask for absolution, she asked for understanding. But understanding does not always fit into official forms. Outside, the story began to circulate. Some listened, others judged. Some said a crime is a crime. Others saw the mother before the offense. Public opinion was divided, as it always is when someone else's pain becomes news. Donavera tried to visit her daughter, but the processes were slow. Documents, rules, schedules, everything seemed designed to remind who is in charge and who waits. When she finally managed to see her, the meeting was brief and painful. Few words, many teary eyes. Mariele asked about her daughters before anything else. She wanted to know if they were okay, if they had eaten, if they were sleeping. Her mother replied yes, even without absolute certainty. Sometimes protecting also means lying a little. The weight of guilt began to turn into something even harder. Shame. Shame of being seen there. Shame of imagining what her daughters might hear in the future. Shame of not having been able to protect them from the world. But along with the shame, something unexpected began to emerge. Small, fragile, almost invisible, the possibility of change. People started to mobilize. Social workers appeared, volunteer lawyers, people who saw beyond the mistake. Nothing was resolved, nothing was guaranteed. But for the first time in a long while, Mariele felt that maybe she was not completely alone. The day of the hearing arrived, wrapped in silence. Mariele woke up before being called, without having truly slept. Her mind replayed the same images over and over, her daughters, the modest house, the supermarket, the handcuffs. Everything blended together, out of order, without rest. When she entered the room, she felt the weight of the place, the cold walls, the hard chairs, the attentive gazes. It was not a courtroom of spectacle. It was a space where decisions changed destinies, even when they seemed small on paper. The judge listened, the prosecutor spoke. The public defender presented the facts. There was no theatrics, there was reality. One mother, two children, a non-violent crime, a context of extreme poverty. Everything laid out directly, without embellishment. Mariele kept her head down. Her hands trembled. She did not expect mercy. She expected justice, even though she did not know exactly what that meant in that moment. Outside, Donavera waited with her granddaughters. The girls did not fully understand what was happening, but they felt that something important was at stake. They played quietly, holding tightly to their grandmother's hand. The decision came after a break that felt endless. When Mariele heard the words, it took a few seconds to understand. It was not full freedom. It was not definitive prison. It was a chance. Alternative measures, social monitoring, institutional support. The possibility of responding in freedom, close to her daughters. A difficult path, full of rules, but outside prison bars. The tears came uncontrollably. It was not joy. It was relief mixed with exhaustion. A body that, after a long time on alert, finally gave in. When she reunited with her daughters, the embrace was tight, silent, long. There were no grand promises, only presence, only the now. Life was not resolved, poverty had not disappeared, but something essential had been preserved, the bond. Returning home did not mean returning to normal. The house was the same, but Mariele was not. Every wall carried the memory of absence. Every corner reminded her how quickly everything could collapse. In the first days, she barely slept. Any noise made her wake up. The fear of losing everything again still lived there, silent but present. The daughters noticed. They stayed closer, quieter, as if they too were relearning how to live. Donna Vera was a constant source of support, not through speeches, but through presence. A plate of food, a short conversation, a look that said, "You are not alone." Between the two of them there was no judgment. There was shared survival. Help began to arrive little by little. Donations, used clothes, small opportunities. The improvised thrift shop at home was born more out of necessity than dream. Even so, it became a symbol. Each piece sold was more than money. It was dignity recovered inch by inch. Mariele began to comply with all the requirements imposed by the justice system. She showed up, signed documents, followed the rules, not out of fear of punishment, but out of a deep desire not to go backward. She knew that this was her only bridge. The daughters began to smile more easily again. Small things gained immense value. A full glass of milk, a piece of chocolate shared, a hug before sleep. Nothing was guaranteed, but everything was lived intensely. Mariele never denied what she did. She also never accepted the label of criminal as a definition of who she is. For her, the mistake was the consequence. Hunger was the origin. As time passed, Mariele's story stopped being just hers. Neighbors talked about it, some quietly, others out loud. Some judged, others understood. But all of them in some way were touched by a reality they preferred not to see. Mariele learned to live with the looks. She no longer lowered her head, nor did she challenge anyone. She walked with the firmness of someone who knows what she has endured. Every step on the street became an act of resistance. The daughters grew a little more, not only in age, but in awareness. They knew their mother had been through something difficult, even if they did not understand everything. What they did feel was the doubled love, the excessive care, the constant presence. That was enough. Donna Vera remained the pillar, sometimes tired, sometimes worried, but always there. The hunger that once hovered over that family was no longer a daily reality. Uncertainty still existed, but it no longer ruled everything. Mariele began to speak when people asked, not to justify herself, but to explain that poverty pushes, that hunger humiliates, that desperation distorts choices, and that no mother should ever be placed in front of such a decision. She did not see herself as an example, nor as an absolute victim. She saw herself as the consequence of a system that fails before it punishes. A system that arrests quickly, but helps slowly. Justice continued on its course, proceedings, deadlines, waiting. None of it erased what had already been lived, but it also did not define the future entirely. Mariele's story ends without applause. It ends with a silent question, left hanging in the air for whoever listens. How far is someone capable of going to save their own children? And who should have arrived before hunger did?